I want to ask Seth to stand up. Seth is going to have a microphone in his hand in a minute, and we're going to be wandering through the audience. So if you do have questions or comments, can you raise your hands now if anyone has comments on what they heard? Is that Mr. John Blockbath? John Blockbath did a hot job. He's going to have hot advice. And you know he's 19, and if you had energy now, you should have seen me 11 years ago. So if folks have comments, we're going to make our way to you all. And with that, David Cobb, President.
President. American candidate. But my name is David Cobb, and I work with an organization called the Liberty Tree Foundation for the Democratic Revolution. I'm glad to see that word actually gets a little applause here, because I'm actually proud to say that I am a nonviolent revolutionary. I'm a nonviolent revolutionary because I know I live in a racist, sexist, class-oppressive, and homophobic society, and I want a revolution that will make this a peaceful, just, compassionate world to live in. And I am an electoral reform activist because I know we have to reform elections in order to create the society that I want to live in. It's not an academic exercise for me. If I want to live in the society that will not just allow me to, but encourage me to be fully loving, compassionate with other people, if I want to experience what I believe to be my birthright as a human being, to be in genuine community with other people, we have got to transform how elections happen. It's just that simple. Because guess what? The United States of America is not now, nor has it ever been, a functioning democracy. It wasn't designed to be a functioning democracy. Because Susanna did a very good job of reminding us that in the beginning, only rich white men were allowed to vote. There's a reason, Rob, that there's not a constitutional right to vote. Because in the Constitution, only about 4% of the adult human beings actually were persons with any rights under the Constitution at all. Right? And it's not a democracy because I know that the overwhelming majority of the people want to end the war in Iraq. And yet the illegal, immoral, and unconstitutional war continues. Right? It's not a functioning democracy because the overwhelming majority of Americans want single-payer universal health care as a fundamental human right. I know it's not a functioning democracy because the overwhelming majority of us want everybody to make enough money to raise their family in dignity by raising the minimum wage to an actual living wage. That's what we want. And we don't have it. And you know why? Because it's not a functioning democracy. So this is not an academic exercise for me. Instant runoff voting, proportional representation, voter registration, publicly financed elections. These are not just interesting or even good policies. These are the necessary keys for us to be able to access rules to create the society that we actually want to live in. Now, I think it's important to recognize that what I'm describing is a movement. Right? I am trying to be part of and inspire you to join and become part of a movement. How many of you here would self-identify and say, damn right, I'm part of the media reform movement? Yeah? Say something! Hell yeah! There is a media reform movement happening, right? There are thousands of us joining together here in the Twin Cities to come and celebrate and conspire and to strategize and be part of it. Well, I am suggesting that what we also need is a democracy movement in the United States. And it saddens me because I think I can prove that we don't actually have a real democracy movement in this country because people don't talk about it that way, right? I mean, I've got plenty of my friends and colleagues and comrades who talk about being part of the anti-war movement or the peace movement or the queer rights movement or, the women's movement. People talk in those terms. I humbly suggest we need to start talking about being part of a democracy movement, because democracy is about power. And if we're really going to affect any of these things, we've got to be about a power movement. And by the way, not seizing the levers of power so that we can continue this dominator, power over kind of model of the society we've been brought into, but a power with model that is explicitly feminist, explicitly anti-oppression, explicitly anti-racist, and is explicitly a power with model where we're going to collaborate and conspire and share power with one another. I think that that's not only possible, but I think in our hearts, that's what we really all yearn for. But this system is designed to prevent us from even being able to think about it or talk about it. And so we're not even able to articulate what's really in our hearts, what we really, really want. As my niece has taught me to say, what you really, really want. Right? Because instead of voting proportional representation, I want that. But what I really, really want is a different world. And so I want to point out that women were not given the right to vote. Right? They took it! They built the movement. They demanded it. They made it happen. You know? And let's just take a moment and recognize, that throughout all of history, let's celebrate the fact that people before us did not quit. They did not go away. They continued to educate, to agitate, to organize, and that's what actually builds movement beyond. Because the Constitution originally said women can't vote. And not only could African Americans not vote, they didn't have any rights at all. They were literally chattel property. We can't even begin to imagine how perverse that system is. And yet, it was only a little over 200 years ago that was the reality. Movements transformed this society. And we can do it again, but we have to imagine it. We have to demand it. We have to say that this is part of what, not only that we want, but that we deserve it. We got to raise our expectations. And I believe that a democracy movement would do exactly that. And check it out. Did you know that under law, before a woman was a person with constitutional rights, before African Americans were fully legal persons with constitutional rights, corporations were considered persons with constitutional rights? That's messed up! I would use a different word if we weren't being taped. Because that's how mad I am about that. But so here it is. I've been asked to talk about concretely what we can do. But the first thing I wanted to do is expand our mind. Let's get bigger. Let's talk about what we really want. Because people will not get excited, I don't think, about voting rule changes as an academic exercise, but they'll get fired up about voting rule changes if you're talking about power. If you're talking about how they can actually affect the society that they want to live in. So, corporate personhood is the idea that a corporation is a person with constitutional rights. Raise your hand if you've heard of that doctrine or know anything about it. Check it out. I remember 5 years ago I would have these kinds of conversations. As many hands would go up as instant runoff voting. Now, imagine, if you will, a little community in Humboldt County that passed a local law that said corporations cannot contribute money in any elections. As Solange pointed out, the corrupting influence of corporate money in elections. We say they can't contribute money in elections, and they can't claim constitutional rights of being a person in order to overturn this law. In other words, taking a concrete electoral reform issue, tying it to a deeper analysis to delegitimize a legal doctrine that is basically corrupting and keeping us down. Now, that idea, Measure T, I want to replicate it. I'm asking you, come out and see us in Humboldt County. This is an invitation to a training that we're doing for folks. Come up and see me. I want to talk to you about that. So that's a local issue, and there are so many local issues that we're working on in my community. We passed a law that said, not a resolution against the Patriot Act, a law that instructs the local police, the local librarian, and the local city clerk to refuse to comply with certain aspects of the unconstitutional Patriot Act. What I'm talking about, you can applaud that, right? A community in active defiance of the Bush administration's clear violations of our constitutional rights. And this is not a crazy idea, right? We're defending ourselves. And what I'm getting at is we need to replicate those kinds of models where ordinary people in your community, where you live, work, and play, begin to create your local community as an example of it. And that's why instant runoff voting is winning. How many, like we've won 7 out of 8?
13 out of 14.
13 out of 14, depends on when you go back. 13 out of 14 times at the local level, right? And Portland, Oregon has passed local campaign finance and publicly funded elections, as has Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Albuquerque. Your community can do it too. Now, the last thing that I want to close on, thank you, close on with this, and that is George W. Bush stole elections. Yeah, I even got an oh yeah from the recorder. No, he did not. There was definitely a Supreme Court who conspired to make it happen. And in addition to that, I will say a complicit U.S. electorate that allowed it to happen. And so I'm going to close with this. The work that I'm doing with my colleague, Brandon Lacey Campos. Brandon, would you stand up? Don't just wave. Stand up. Look at that man right there. We are inviting you to join us at the national level to get ready, no matter what any candidate does in 2008. If there's a stolen election, get your ass out into the streets with pots and pans. Raise hell. No more stolen elections. Not on my watch. No more. We have more power than we dare to imagine, and it's going to be up to us to build a movement to transform the rules of elections. But in 2008, we got to get the vote out. We got to use the system that we have in place, and we got to get ready to pour into the streets and make damn sure that we do not let another election get stolen. Peace.
So, thank you very much, panelists. We're going to hear, don't you guys hear my voice? I'm trying to sneak around to keep you guys on your toes. I want to thank all of our panelists. You can see their bios in the booklet. And I want to take a minute now, being that we have him in the house, so that we don't lose an opportunity to hear from another amazing leader. Mr. Bonifaz, what are you doing in town?
My name is Scott Bonifaz. I'm the legal director for Voter Action, and I actually have a public service announcement and a comment. The public service announcement is that we're having a special session on election integrity tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, in room 212A here, and we're going to be showing the film Uncounted. Some of you may have seen it. David Earnhardt's film emanated former winning director, as well as a special summary excerpt of Dan Rather reports the trouble with touchscreens, which appeared on HDNet last August and needs to be more fully distributed. And John Nichols is going to join us for introductory remarks, and we're having a discussion on the connection between media reform and election integrity. So I urge you, if you can, to join us and spread the word from 212A tomorrow at 6 o'clock. My comment is that in addition to all the very important points that we've just heard about, if you want to pick up on another piece of this democracy movement that we focus on, which directly connects to what Solange talked about in terms of public funding elections. On the one end of the spectrum, we have the corporate and private control of our election process through the financing of political campaign finance. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the corporate and private control of how we're conducting our elections. There's this growing privatization of our public election process. More and more election officials around the country are outsourcing key election functions to private vendors, private corporations. This is not just in the form of voting machine technology, as important and critical a question that is, but it's in the form of electronic poll books, privatized voter registration databases. In New Mexico, in the Democratic caucus on February 5th, 17,000 voters had to cast provisional ballots because the voter registration database created and maintained by election systems and software had major flaws. In Georgia on February 5th, Super Tuesday as well, electronic poll books crashed throughout the state, manufactured by default. People could not vote. They were faced long lines and had to be turned away. So I think what we have to do when we talk about this question of democracy is we have to talk about reclaiming public control of our process, public control of our elections. And that comes certainly in the form of public funding elections, but it also comes in the form of controlling how we conduct our elections on the other end of the spectrum. And that means reclaiming our democracy. We have on our website, voteraction.org, a campaign to reclaim. We think it's time to bring the election industry, the handful of companies, Diebold, Sequoia, election systems and software, and Hardin and Civic, bring them before Congress, have a full investigation into what they've known about the products they're marketing and when they've known it. Just like we brought big tobacco before Congress, 7 CEOs raising their hand and having to testify under oath about the health effects of the product they've been marketing. It's time to hold the election industry accountable for what they're marketing around the country and to bring back the billions of dollars of taxpayer money that's been misspent for technology that's not working, not counting our votes. Thank you.
Just wanted to say, John is such a hero of democracy and the work he's done. He's also a Carthage genius, so that's what I remark about genius. But John, we're not reclaiming. We're claiming, and I think it's an important distinction that as a general concept, there's not an Eden we're going back to. And on certain, we have counted ballots maybe better in some places in other past, but we have so much to do that we have never done. And as I think David Cobb said clearly, and I think as we think about where we need to go, it is forward. And I just wanted to say that, but also as I was here, I just wanted to say in the spirit of special announcements like the No More Stolen Elections, one of my allies or colleagues, Tara Young, is here, and she works with us on a project, the Democracy SOS Project. And I just want to give a plug to that. SOS is a nickname for Secretary of State. People know about some Secretaries of State, Blackwell in Ohio and Harris in Florida. Secretaries of State have a big role over elections, and Common Cause, lots of good groups are tracking their actions, but they also run for office in a lot of states. And there's a bunch of Secretary of State offices this year up for election, and then a bunch more, a whole lot more in 2010. And that's a great time to engage with candidates, press them on these issues, and make sure they come into office on a strong platform. And run for office yourself in 2010, as Mr. Bonifaz did, which is why I was thinking about that. The other special announcement, just if there's students in the room, is instant runoff voting can be won at your school. Proportional representation can be won at your school. Some of the radical bastions to have passed it include University of Oklahoma, Rice University in Houston, dozens of universities, probably about 50, have passed instant runoff voting or proportional representation for student elections, and it's working well. It actually really is often quite impactful. They're like, fraternity-dominant schools where they can start getting different voices and things like that. So it's something to work for in your schools. Thanks.
Are you all fired up about this conversation?
Absolutely.
Aren't you excited?
Yeah.
Who's that guy standing next to you?
I don't know.
My name is Samuel Suki, and I'm from Iraq. I lived here for 20 years.
Welcome!
Exactly 2004, I decided to sell my place, restaurant, and catering, not too far from here. I operated there 17 years, and as one of you indicated that
questions, or are there any questions? Yes, ma'am. Let me get to. See, I'm supposed to be like Phil Donahue, who I hear is in the house, and so I probably could use lessons. I'm just going to. Can y'all hear?
Yeah. Okay. Sam and Bob, I work with these guys. They're wonderful. They do great work. I have one question for you. You know that the capacity of elections to actually deliver on election day, the millions of registered voters to be able to be processed on that day, makes it very, very difficult for that to happen. So some states have advanced the notion of early election, early voting, alternative means of voting. I wanted to know if you are laying out some of the plans for observing elections, also doing some of that early voting observation, and people to help you with that.
So the question, I just want to repeat the question. So the question was early voting and what's going on with that. Is that an option as we're looking at observing elections?
Yeah. I mean, Lily's right. It's absolutely critical. Listen, I've given you all jobs to do an election, and you're going to be too busy to vote. So you need to vote absentee, and you need to vote, or you need to vote early. Now, some states, again, make it really hard to vote absentee. Some states you have to get a note from your doctor and your mother and your lawyer. Other states, they get it, and it's okay. There's no excuse absentee, and you can just vote. I never ran on election day. I always vote early. So that is going to be part of our campaign, and shenanigans occur in early voting too. And we're going to need poll watchers and people to be working on the early voting. Most of the poll workers that are they're becoming clerks, and they're sort of set up differently. But early voting is critical because you're all going to be very busy on election day. So vote absentee, vote early, and help out with that process. And again, our hotline is going to be up about a month before the election. So any shenanigans that you hear about, we're in partnership with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the Law, and they have a team of lawyers across the country. So if you call them to 1-866-RVOTE, we'll be able to dispatch legal teams, especially prior to the election day, to figure out what the problem is, whether there's a deception or harassment complaint, whether there's problems with you go to vote early and there's problems with registration, whatever the problems are, we'll be able to work on it. Thanks, Lily.
Do any of the other panelists want to piggyback off of that? All right, Stephen, your question. Where are you from?
I'm from Connecticut.
Fabulous. What's NCMR?
It's a North Carolina newspaper, and I'm also making a documentary called In the Interest of Justice.
Fabulous. And what's your question?
Should George W. Bush be arrested, face trial, and if he's found guilty, shouldn't he go to jail if judges in the U.S. were about to pay for it? Mr. Cobb.
I know it took a big. Yeah, as soon as you get that meeting, you're going to meet my
Go ahead. I also had that thought too. Go ahead, Jay.
As you asked the question, hell yes! Because I asked the question. George W. Bush should face a potential indictment, and he should have a right to representation, a right to a trial, and if he is found guilty, as I believe he would be, for lying American people into a war, right? It's a long list, and I would encourage you to check out After Downing Street, or John Bob has the websites where the litany of the impeachable offenses, AfterDowningStreet.org, and there is a very clear, compelling legal case made for, at the very least, impeachment. And I do believe, in fact, that there are crimes against humanity that have been committed by this administration.
Absolutely. Okay. So, just remind me when you mentioned that judges not paid for. There's a great organization called Justice at Stake, and their website is justiceatstake.org, and they work on judicial public financing. And I'll say, gosh, it's been almost 20 years since I first started practicing law, but I remember being a young trial lawyer, and you have your case, you feel really good about your case, and that you're going to prevail because justice is going to prevail. And can you just imagine how terrible it is to have a great case and only to find out that
the defendant has, just come from a huge fundraiser for the judge. So, I mean, and how crazy is that, So, and how can you have an impartial justice system when, even judges are out dialing for dollars and trying to get, money for their cases. And I always represented, low-income people, and, my first fees were $25 an hour. I'd be hard-pressed to find a lawyer for $25 an hour. You got to go to Humboldt, right? So, I'm in the coast. But, if I had to tell my clients, I'm $25 an hour. Oh, but by the way, you need to cut a check for $2,500 for the fundraiser that I need to go to for the judge. I mean, how does that work? I just want to encourage people, you can go to publiccampaign.org and get information, but you can also go to justiceatstate.org, and they're doing really good things around the country, particularly for those judicial elections where judges are spending $5, $6, $7 million to get reelected.
Hi, I have a question about the last two elections. So both Captain Harris and Ken Blackwell were both Secretary of State in charge of administering election in their state while simultaneously chairing the re-election or election campaign of George Bush. Why isn't that considered explicit conflict of interest? It doesn't seem like a right systemic target for reform.
Right on.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's a huge problem, and what we need is nonpartisan election administrators. You need someone to run it, but they should not be partisan. They should not be running for office simultaneously, and they should not be chairing any political party at all, because it's absolutely confounding. And you're absolutely right. And we work with a number of groups, but taking these ideas back home to your state and starting a movement in your state to get rid of partisan election, the chief election officer. So sometimes it's the Secretary of State, sometimes there's another person running it. But does your website have information on it?
Yeah, it has a bit.
Fairvote.org.
I mean, it's a fascinating thing. David was just saying next to me, no other country does this, of having people run for office that they're also counting the ballots for, and this idea of partisan, But here's one thing that's interesting. Like, say, I mentioned Pierce County, Washington is using instant runoff voting this November. Well, the county auditor, who was elected, is running for that county executive office, and she's making all the decisions about the voting process, and we're kind of working with her, so she, hopefully will run a good instant runoff election. But that's just like the norm, right? She's also running for that office. But she's doing a pretty good job, in part because she is running for the office, so she's got to do a good job, or else people will point a finger at her. And that's one thing we need to do, however we structure the process, is we've got to establish real clear transparency of what they're doing, decisions that are being made, and accountability for things that don't work out right. And as John said, it's public ownership of the voting process that we need to demand, and we often don't have. And so the long lines in Ohio, right? The images of 10-hour lines, 11-hour lines. Did anyone lose a job because of that?
Yeah.
Really? Someone lost a job?
Someone in line.
Yeah. There were people in line. Exactly. Well, a lot of people lost a job about who won or lost, but the people who ran elections are just there's a lot of terrific poll workers and local election officials, and I want to say there are actually lots of terrific people involved in this, but it's not transparent, it's not accountable. So this Democracy SOS project, if you go to fairvote.org and look at the Democracy SOS button, you can find out a lot there, but there's also a lot of other groups. So I just want to say, like Lily and the work that EPIC does, there is just an incredible number, well, in some ways not, well, an incredible number of activists that have helped push for integrity in elections and the whole movement for paper ballots. And that was really driven by the grassroots. Tom Hartman, talking about it early on, and other people kind of made that change happen. and a lot of people in this room probably, but a lot of then people who are just tracking this so closely and kind of fighting for making it better. But we really need to keep after it because there's not enough transparency and definitely not enough accountability.
Hey, Susan, how are you?
I'm pretty good.
What happened to your foot?
Spider bite.
Minnesota?
No, Kansas.
Oh, yeah, that's what happened.
Well, my name is Susan. I'm from Minneapolis, and I want to invite all of you to the Republican National Convention. And I want you all to know that there is an effort to arrest George Bush as he lands at the airport. It has been published by both writer and publisher, Ed Feline. You can look it up, southsidepride.com. So, we hope that we can do the right thing when George comes to town.
My question has to do with what's going on to ensure that the votes of Americans living abroad get counted.
Who wants to take that one?
Well, this really came through Overseas Voter Foundation, and they have a website, but they are doing terrific work on that issue. But there are millions and millions of Americans who live overseas, and they can vote for president, and I think they can vote for all federal offices. They can't necessarily vote for their local offices if they sort of established residency overseas, but you can live for years and years and continue to vote, and that power has been increasingly recognized as important to preserve, and a lot of states protect that right very poorly, so that there's been groups fighting for it, so check out Overseas Voter Foundation, and there's some others too, but that's I think the lead organization.
Absentee ballot. That's how I do it. I live in Ireland, so I put it here, so my absentee ballot.
Right. Absentee ballots. But then they often don't get the absentee ballots, or it hasn't been done well historically, and it's something that needs to be a lot better.
Seth, who do you have up there?
I got this guy.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, I'm Brandon. And my birthday is August 31st. The Republicans are coming. I'm going to Puerto Rico. So if anyone wants to come with me there, my question is, it's election year, so there's lots and lots and lots of energy, and people are really excited and plugged in, and we know in America that does not sustain. So how do we sustain the engagement, and what happens on November 5th? Because I personally have my favorite candidate, but no candidate is Messiah, no candidate is going to give us what we need. So how do we, what happens the day after the election?
I'm going to pass the microphone, but you mentioned Puerto Rico. Just one quick thing about overseas voters. If you're a resident of the States, and then you move to France, you can get an overseas ballot and vote absentee. But if you move to Puerto Rico, which is part of America, you can't vote for president.
We need you the day after the election and the day after that day and all the way through. I mean, we are going to be, again, that's why you have to call 1-866-OUR-VOTE and tell us what happened on election day. We're going to be reporting on everything that went wrong and everything that went right. Join Common Cause, commoncause.org, because we will exhaust you with lobby days. We want you to come to D.C. to change the federal laws on elections. We want you to go to your state houses to change the state laws on elections. And we want you to be with us in helping to claim our democracy and not return to a place that never was, but create a democracy where we're fully engaged. So there are organizations that you can plug into that can give you the nuts and bolts, what day, where, what to say, who to go to. Commoncause.org is one of them. Public Campaign is another. But, we're here 24/7, 365. So, and we're ready for you all to join us. 366 is the lead year. Thanks.
If I could. Look, Common Cause is an awesome organization. I actually give money to them. Fair Vote, awesome organization. I work for them and continue to. Public Campaign, I support them. National organizations are critically important. But you know what we should do immediately after the election? First, we should audit them the way they're doing it in Southern. What we need to be doing is organizing in our community creating organizational capacity so that we can actually amplify our voices where we are. We will get great help from national organizations that are up here, but at the end of the day, we'll know when we have the movement whenever there are local organizations that are actually pushing it.
You can go to publiccampaign.org and click on your state and find out our state partners and what they're doing to organize in your state, because we have to pass this on a federal level, and we are working with our state partners and engaging in the states so that states can start putting pressure, so state organizations can put pressure on their delegations to pass this at the federal level. So I just encourage you to go to the website, find who your state partners are, and go and volunteer, write letters, send letters to your editors of your newspapers, organize and be active.
Hi, my name is Goodman from Iowa, and in Iowa we have something that's called Voter-Owned Iowa Clean Elections Voice, which is a public finance campaign legislation that we're trying to push to the state. And the ACLU chapter of Iowa has said that there's some constitutional problems with this, that this might not be constitutionally correct. And I know also with some other voter-owned or other campaign finance reform that there's, even if it's not constitutional challenges, sometimes it doesn't work out exactly the way they intended. Like the rich people figure out a way to work around it. So I'm just wondering if you have any hints, any suggestions to avoid these pitfalls.
Yes, thanks for asking. So let me just say that we work with another wonderful organization, the Brennan Center for Justice, for anybody and they review and help states to make sure that their laws are constitutional when they draft them. So I know Voices and the other organization in Iowa, ICCI, are working with the Brennan Center for Justice to make sure that what they're drafting actually is going to withstand constitutional muster. The basic tenet of public financing, it only works if it's voluntary. You can't force people to opt into a public financing system. That's the Supreme Court, case in, John, help me out, what's the name of the case? That's right, Buckley v. Vallejo. And I know John Bonk has worked for many years to work on that case. But the Supreme Court has, issued that. We work very hard to make sure that states follow that. And one other thing is that on the national level of the ACLU, we were invited to meet with the board because they are considering their policy about public financing. It's not consistent. So some state-based ACLU organizations support public financing, some do not. And it's not the voluntary nature of it that they oppose to. It's the contribution limits that are placed on organizations and those type of issues.
So I want to jump on this real quick because it is true. At Public Campaign, the Brennan Center are doing great work under existing Supreme Court interpretation of the Constitution. But I want to be very clear. The U.S. Supreme Court is the same institution that once said women are not persons, that no black man has any rights that a white man is bound to respect. This is the same court that upheld, the institution that upheld Jim Crow segregation laws. So I want to respectfully suggest that if we are going to allow the same court that also gave us 5-4 Bush versus Gore and installed an illegitimate occupant of the White House, we make a mistake as a movement. I really think when I say raise our expectations, we got to start buckling, right? That court decision is wrong. A corporation is not a person. They do not have constitutional rights. The court is wrong. And we need to be part of the movement. And yes, there are times whenever you need to parse it out. There are other times when we just got to raise hell and tell the truth that we know to be. And so I want to suggest that there are ways, and again, what we did in our local community was said corporations are not persons with these First Amendment rights, period. And we're challenging the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Bring it.
My understanding is that Iowa also just passed election day registration, the latest state to join Minnesota. I have a flyer from Demos, which drops them off here, about election day registration. Demos, Brennan Center, and Iowa Citizen Action, all the groups that are, there are so many groups. Take Back Minnesota, I think is that the name of the group that's working here. Take Action Minnesota. There's a lot of terrific groups. We have did a conference called ClaimDemocracy.com. We did a little sort of version of it yesterday, but one last year. And if you go to ClaimDemocracy.com, it has links to lots of great groups around the country working on a full range of issues.
My name is Maggie Rollin. I'm from Des Moines, Iowa. I'm here with a group representing Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We have thank you. We have a course called Challenge Corporate Power, Assert People's Rights. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about corporate personhood beyond what you have said. The corporations have such a right to give such huge amount of campaign money through that Buckley-Valeo constitutional amendment. Through Buckley-Valeo with the Supreme Court. And the only way they had that was because they could use the First Amendment saying we are persons. When you talked about corporate personhood and what we're going to do about it, the only thing you said is that in Humboldt County you got the city council to do that, to make that change for you. Well, you live in a very liberal area where your council members are easy to convince. Try to do that in Des Moines, Iowa, or in many other cities that people come from. When then we talk about maybe Common Cause can get legislation passed, campaign finance reform legislation passed, do you think the corporations are going to want that to happen? They will give all the money and more to each of the senators and representatives, Republican and Democrat, to not allow campaign finance reform legislation to be passed that isn't full of loopholes as the most recent one, McCain-Feingold. My question is, and I'm being told I need to ask the question, my question is, please, how can you get more information out about corporate personhood and connect the dots so that people know this is the issue. We have to work against that money that corporations are putting in, and the people have to become informed. How, beyond what you're saying, your liberal city council passing a resolution.
I want to ask Dave Cobb to take that and be mercifully brief. We have 10 more minutes and there's a lot of people with their hands up. And from questions here on out, I'm only going to ask one panelist to take it and to also be mercifully brief.
Thank you. All right, so we use the citizens initiative process. Citizens voted on it. You could do it at the city charter level and bypass the elected officials if you want. At the end of the day, if we're going to really be about a movement, we're going to have to convince our neighbors, our friends, and our family members in order to actually do the difficult work of changing our culture. And that's the way it works. And there is no easy answer for it, but we do it joyously, we do it happily, we do it with a vision, and we dance our way into a revolution.
I have a concern. The one I wanted to ask about.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Common cause. In regard to absentee ballots, I would be hard pressed to trust, say, Florida, regarding the integrity of those absentee ballots. Where do absentee ballots land up? How long are they there? And what do you do to prevent the tampering with them? And then I have another quick question. Don't we need a constitutional amendment to eliminate the electoral college?
Electoral college.
Briefly, absentee ballots are usually come to central at the county clerk's office. And, there's a lot there. Elected county clerks, county clerks you can trust. At a certain point, it comes down to people, and people run the election. So all y'all should be county clerks. I mean, at a certain point, there is trust in the process. We can monitor, we can look at chain of custody issues. We can transparency is the biggest thing. We need publicly observable counting everywhere in all parts of the process, and that would bring the most trust. Okay, but that's your second question.
Very quickly on electoral college. To abolish the electoral college would take a constitutional amendment. To establish the policy of a national popular vote can be done by action of the states. And that's the top of the plan. Check out the brochure, but basically that's the hidden power that I think a lot of us didn't realize we had, but we did.
Seth, do you have anyone over there? There's a woman in a black turtleneck shirt who has had her hand up for a minute.
Hi, thank you very much. Maybe black pays off, I don't know. But my question is this. I worked as a poll worker in Los Angeles, a little suburb of Pasadena. And I think, first of all electoral activists, we all meet there. And what I observed was how terribly full of holes the whole process is. From the education that they give the volunteers, who are mostly elderly there because they get paid, to the actual performance on election day where they not really understand what they're doing. And then, of course, there are the people who purposely have an ideology about preventing people from voting. And votes are routinely packaged and not delivered or thrown away. I'm not saying it's everywhere. But I do know from a person, a friend of mine who was working in a black neighborhood, a poor black neighborhood, and 400 votes, she said, I can guarantee you 400 votes were not counted because because of the actions of the county clerk. You know, people send in their change in registration, then the changes aren't reflected over the list that come out, so therefore they're not allowed to vote because their names don't coordinate, so on and so forth. My question is there an effort, or don't you think there should be an effort on the part of all of the organizations concerned with electoral fraud before the election to get together a list of warnings and education for the vulnerable populations, which are mostly poor and mostly minority, black and so forth, and, Hispanic and so forth, and elderly, just for example, the elderly voting places are usually in their convalescent homes. Well, in Los Angeles, for important elections, all of a sudden they were moved blocks away, so people with wheelchairs didn't have access and so forth. I mean, is there a way, I think that we need to really have a concerted strategy of education and spotlighting the vulnerable populations before the election, because we know that everything is going to be done for this election on the ground to stop Obama from becoming elected.
Susan, I'm gonna turn it over to you so you can talk about the ongoing coalition.
Absolutely. That we're working with election officials, but then we're going to be gearing up into major voter education. And Common Cause is in a very big coalition, the Election Protection Coalition, with all kinds of groups. That goes very down deep into the grassroots level, but we're not going to hit everything, and that's why we need all of you. And the other thing is when shenanigans, not turning in the voter registrations or not registering them, any kind of oversight like that, that's what 1866 our vote is for. Reporting that kind of stuff. Because as an individual, you may not feel like, what can you do? But now we're trying to hook you up with a team of attorneys that can help you investigate and help that.
One more thing.
And I just want to step in as I'm going to jump in here as well. So the Election Protection Coalition have been meeting and are meeting, and so there are prep. And Ruckus, the Ruckus Society also does this really interesting thing talking about recording our vote. And they go down, it's a similar model to Cop Watch, when folks on the street would go around and videotape the cops harassing us. That's what they're talking about, having folks from the hood go down and videotape the folks being denied. And there's a whole system, and move on to part of it and everything. So I would encourage you guys to check it out and support it.
Before you even have problems, the coalition, I'm an attorney that participated in our vote and went around the country. They produce voter Bill of Rights. So before the election, you can download the voter Bill of Rights for your state and your community, and you can hand them out. They do a good job. A lot of the organizations do a good job. They go to the churches, do fans, they do all kinds of things so people know in advance before they get to the polls what their rights are.
And SCIU has a really cool card that's in Spanish and English. All right, we are coming to a close, and I know that a ton of people have their hands up, and that we would do an entire conference on this, and that after this is done, we're going to come together probably around here or mill around Assembly from St. Paul is going to close us out with a dope question. Karen?
Like this. I know that I'm a revolutionary at a conference about reform, and I know that I'm a movement person at a conference, at a workshop about electoral politics. I'm here because I love you, David Cobb. But I just want to say that as a movement person, I'm so frustrated by elections. They come and suck all the energy out of the movement. Emma Goldman said 100 years ago, if elections could change anything, they would be illegal. Convince me, David, that she was wrong.
All right, here's what I'm going to tell you, Karen. Emma Goldman was absolutely correct as far as elections are currently imminent. And why it is so important to change these first principles. Because if we have fully publicly funded elections, and if we use system runoff voting and proportional representation, and if we fully enfranchise formerly incarcerated people to address the systemic racism associated with that, and if we actually have full participation to the ballot and debate of independent and alternative party candidates, if we transform how elections are conducted, we could have a revolution and it would be peaceful.
I had Amy Goodman's talk last night at the close of our conference. Just the thing that was clear to me is that if we had all the things that we're working on here, the U.S. Senate has 100 people. We would have about 20 to 25, not maybe as articulate and as Amy Goodman, but from a perspective that's comparable. That perspective is there, and it's just not represented because of electoral rules we have. And I think that's important.
All right, thank you, everybody. Can I get a great round of applause?